Hello and welcome to my review for the second episode of the third season of Designated Survivor. The episode is entitled Slippery Slope, and in this episode we actually see it take place 6 months down the line from the original premiere. The main plot involves Kirkman posing in a photo op with a Saudi national, but we actually figure out the Saudi national is posing with his 14-year-old wife, not his daughter. And so there's a firestorm at the White House of, well, what should be done about child marriage and what should be done about Kirkman to basically refocus the media's attention on his campaign in a positive light. And so we see that be the main plot thread of the episode. The conversation that Kirkman has with the Saudi Arabian representative doesn't go well because they exchange, oh, well, America's done this thing that's bad and Saudi Arabia's done this thing that's bad, and the conversation's unproductive. And we actually see, though, that in the press briefing, Seth is bombarded with questions not regarding Saudi Arabian child marriage, but American child marriage, which prior to this episode I didn't realize still existed, but it turns out it actually does. And so it's kind of a poignant topic of contention throughout the episode. And we see that Kirkman is torn because on one hand he wants to pass a law that would ban child marriage, but then on both sides of the aisle, the right sees it as a states' rights issue. The ACLU and left-wing organizations see it basically as child marriage or marriage of any kind being protected under the Bill of Rights. And so we actually run into an issue where Kirkman, if he were to try to pass the law or try to push for the law to be passed, it would be swatted down. So in the end of the episode, he decides to give that up and basically postpone it. So it's interesting, I think, because the easy route to go would be, okay, child marriage, this is a layup. Kirkman's going to say, hey, we don't want to have child marriage anymore, we'll make the decision. But I think it's actually realistic that because different political organizations have different beliefs, it would actually be incredibly hard for a president to pass a law like that. And I think it's more interesting from a storytelling perspective to introduce the issue and have Kirkman say, hey, I'm not going to try to push this through because it's not possible. Because it highlights kind of how the system works and how it would really work if this scenario were to come up in modern day politics. The one thing I didn't like is how the international incident with Saudi Arabia was actually never resolved in the episode. We don't see a resolution to it. We see Aaron Shore kind of talk about how important Saudi Arabia is on the news and saying that it's essential to fighting Al Qaeda and terror in the East, but we don't actually see anything addressed. So while I think the actual plot itself was pretty strong, I don't believe that the resolution to the original question posed was that satisfying. We have a ton of other smaller subplots. Some work, some don't. Hannah, the CIA agent, finds out that there is a biohacker that she can talk to. She talks to the biohacker, and they go to a lab that is empty. It's actually the lab that at the beginning of the episode we see a guy in the freezer yelling, basically saying like, hey, let me out. But the only other plot point we have is basically the lab scrubbed when they go there, and then the episode shows that the guy who is running the lab is dead on the floor, clearly infected with something, and gasoline and a match is lit to burn his corpse. So it was pretty dramatic. But again, the CIA subplot throughout the series is kind of like the B plot, and it's definitely, you can tell by the lack of inaction. It seems like the plot goes on throughout the season and nothing really happens with it. It kind of goes to a standstill, and they go to places that weren't expensive to shoot at. So I just feel like the show's trying to be a political thriller, as well as kind of like a law enforcement show, and you can't do both of those things, because whenever you try to do both of those things, it detracts from both stories. Because I found myself during those scenes wanting to go back to see how Kirkman was dealing with the crisis. We see Aaron. There are two funny subplots in the episode. Aaron is listed as being the sexiest politician, and jokes go around the White House, and the White House has a rat problem, so there's rats running around, and basically Mars has to kind of shut that down and try to figure out, like, hey, how do we deal with these rats? There was a cool little point made. There was a border dispute between a Russian ship on the coast of Norway, and basically Aaron's told to or Aaron tells the president that he advises that they send an American ship towards Russian borders to basically show support of Norway, and basically the disputes resolved by that action. And I just think it's cool that they introduce like little political issues and then resolve them throughout the episode, because it makes the immersion more realistic, because you're like, oh, the president would be getting like a million different things heading towards him throughout the day. I do think it's cool. I wanted to mention that they do use real clips that they took that were recorded by people who were either victims of whatever they're talking about. So they have somebody who was a victim of child marriage, or basically people who wanted to voice basically their disillusion with the U.S. political system, how they feel like if there was a third candidate, they might vote. But the reason they showed in the interviews that they recorded that different people have actual reasons why they wouldn't want to go and vote. So I thought that was cool that they incorporate real clips. Apparently they did that with the first episode, which I failed to mention. We have the weirdest subplot of the whole entire season, where Seth basically was a sperm donor, and he figures out he has a daughter who wants to be in contact with him. And the plot is really odd. I mean, it's just an odd idea to have for a subplot in a show about the White House. It's kind of funny, but at the same time, it's like, it's definitely out of place. But that's introduced. He basically reaches out to have contact with her this episode. And then we actually see that Aaron is offered the opportunity to become the vice president under Kirkman, at least as far as the running's concerned for the election. And that's not resolved till later episodes. But overall, it was a stronger showing. I think the topic area of child marriage was interesting. I think that the show could have focused on, like, there's an episode in the second season where they focused on basically two countries that were like North Korea and South Korea and their border dispute. You know, they could have gone with the stuff that's kind of floating around the ether of American politics and it's easy to grab, but they chose to go with like a really obscure issue. So I think that was cool. And the episode was just better paced. Overall, the episode was solid. I know my thoughts were kind of scattered here and there, but I'd give the episode a 8 out of 10. So let me know in the comments what you think of Designated Survivor, especially the later season, because I know a lot of people tuned in for the first because of the concept of the show, but really it's weird because it's a show that kind of has had to find its own identity in the later seasons. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel. There will be 2 reviews per week and 1 podcast that is released every Friday at 8 p.m. live. So I will see you either in one of my other videos or see you then.